Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Closing the Skills Gap, Age-Inclusive Learning Strategies. My name is Heather Tinsley-Fix, and I am coming to you here from AARP, where I lead a big chunk of AARP's work on employer engagement, so working with you all and engaging with you. So I wanted to go over just a couple of housekeeping things with you. First of all, we should know that we are recording this conversation today. And also, we encourage you to ask questions, of course. We'd like you to use the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, and also to chat with each other and with us in the chat window over to your right. So please feel free to ask us any questions. We'll try and get to all of them. And we're very excited to go ahead and get started. So Colin, our trusty behind the scenes person, is going to be advancing the slides. So Colin, go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So we're very excited to start this webinar today. We're going to be covering a number of things. You'll be able to learn about different methods you can employ to upskill and reskill your workers. Also, we'll cover existing resources that you can use to develop your organization's initiatives around this topic, and also provide some practical examples of employer partnerships with higher learning institutions, how you can leverage relationships with community colleges and other learning institutions in your area to achieve some of these learning goals. So Colin, next slide, please. And actually go to the next one as well, thank you. So I'm going to be covering just a couple of things before I introduce the stars of our show, which are our panelists. And I'm going to be covering sort of how to think about learning and develop in an age-inclusive way. But before I do that, I'm going to ask, why does this matter? I mean, I don't need to ask that. Everybody on the call, I'm sure, knows why this matters. But the situation with the skill landscape that we're in today is that 87% of executives say that they're experiencing skills gaps now or expect them within the next few years. And this really isn't surprising when you consider the big shift that we're undergoing. It's often called the fourth industrial revolution. Work is changing rapidly, and automation and the use of artificial intelligence to analyze huge data sets and the automation of many of our job tasks, which is predicted to accelerate, simply means that the skill sets we've spent years achieving are starting to shift in a very swift and rapid way. Next slide, please, Colin. Another thing I wanted to note about the skills landscape is that there is an increasing importance in what we call uniquely human skills. So while there is, quite rightly, a lot of emphasis on technical skills, there is also a growing need for what are called soft skills, often called soft skills, but we like to call human skills. And sometimes these skills are the hardest ones to find. This is a graphic out of the 17th annual PwC CEO survey, but I could have chosen from a ton of different white papers, blogs, and articles. This comes up again and again, that employers are finding it difficult to hire for soft skills. You can see that the top 5 skills that employers are having trouble recruiting for are all in this category. So creativity and innovation, leadership, emotional intelligence, and adaptability, problem solving. And these are skills that are hard to analyze in an interview. They're hard to determine if people have them. They are, however, also skills that tend to be acquired on the job and with experience. And this is good news if you have a multi-generational workforce and can leverage the older parts of your workforce, because a lot of times these are skills that need to be taught and acquired on the job. Things like the ability to communicate well, to be succinct, to understand what information matters and how to communicate it, or critical thinking, relationship management. There's just a ton of these types of skills that take time to develop, and that's good news for you if you have a good mix of ages in your workforce. Next slide, Colin. So that's sort of the external landscape in terms of skills. What about the other side of things? What about how we learn? And I think that if you want to develop an age-inclusive learning strategy, it's important to develop or to adopt an age-inclusive view of how we learn. So a long time ago, sort of in the 70s and 80s, there was this idea that your intelligence peaks at 20. And after that, it's all downhill. It's a long, slow slide into senility. And luckily, of course, that is not the case. And then later on, the thinking shifted to understand that there are sort of two major types of intelligence. One, which is called fluid intelligence, which is said to peak at 20. And two, crystallized intelligence, which is said to peak at around 60. And I'll talk about those two types of intelligences in a minute. But our thinking has evolved even further beyond that in fact, beyond just two types of intelligence, there are multiple peaks of learning ability throughout our lives as we age. So for example, while fluid intelligence does in fact peak at around 20, our ability to concentrate, say, peaks at around 43. Our ability to learn new information peaks at about 50. And our ability to, or in fact, our absorption of vocabulary peaks at 67, right? So there's really no limit to the human brain's ability to continue learning new information as we age. And getting back to the two sort of major differences in types of intelligence. Fluid intelligence is essentially, it's throughput, it's processing speed, right? And this is, you can readily see this, especially in younger people. Their brains are very quick and things can move through and be processed fast. As we age, the brain structure literally changes. And so our brains start to adopt more crystallized intelligence, which you can see here peaks at about 60. Again, these are sort of, estimates, but crystallized intelligence is more like contextual information, right? So it's structured information. And I'm going to use an analogy that's not perfect, but I'll use it anyway. If you think of the mind as a library, fluid intelligence at 20 years old, you don't have a lot of books on the shelf, right? You don't have as many books on the shelf. So there's a lot more room to process information. The older you get, the more books get put on your shelf. So when you have a large library with lots of books on the shelf, when you absorb new information, you're going to contextualize it and put it within that library. And that takes time to figure out sort of how to contextualize that information and where to put it in terms of its relation to other information you already have. So that's sort of a shortcut to understanding the difference between those two types of intelligence. Colin, next slide, please. So in the 1980s, a man named Malcolm Knowles created or came up with what he called adult learning theory, which is different from the learning theory for children. So when I say adult here, I actually mean sort of, 18 to 20 is like sort of when you make that shift, right? And he posited that there is a difference in the way that adults learn versus the way children learn. And so he outlined 4 principles of adult learning theory, which I'll go through fairly quickly here. The first is that he noted that adults are self-directed learners. And what that means is that children or young adults tend to have more of an extrinsic motivation, right? Their parents, their peers, they want to, fit into society. They want to do what they're told, more or less, right? So it's not that they're not curious and that they don't want to learn on their own, but they're more motivated by an external force to learn. Adults, on the other hand, are far more self-motivated, intrinsically motivated to learn. The second principle is that adults learn through experience rather than memorization, right? So children have the kind of brains, if any of you have children in Montessori, you know this, there's a huge capacity to absorb and memorize information and knowledge when you are younger. Adults, however, learn through experience, hands-on learning, through doing. The third principle that he identified is that adults are motivated to learn things that are directly relevant to them, right? So how is this going to apply to me right now? How is it going to advance a goal of mine? And fourth, adult learning is problem-oriented rather than content-oriented. So again, not just absorbing and memorizing, but analyzing and applying information. So what kind of implications does this have for the upskilling and reskilling, or the learning and development environment we're creating? Well, so first of all, in terms of being self-directed learners, learning and development platforms should accommodate self-paced learning and have multiple options for how students would approach the material. The material should focus on tasks and activities that occur on the job. Again, it needs to be immediately relevant to the adult learner, why they're absorbing this information or why they're learning this new skill. Third, or the platform or the course should relate learning opportunities to career success, professional development, again, a specific outcome that matters to the learner, to the adult learner. And the course material should include situational, real world, hands-on types of opportunity for learning. You see this a lot in like executive courses at universities that partner with, AARP, for example, partners with Georgetown University on a program like this. And the students in the class take what they're learning and they actually apply it to an issue or a initiative or program at AARP. So again, applying that information and that you're learning to real world opportunities. Next slide, Colin. So since we're AARP and we are, of course, here to promote the value of older workers and as part of your multi-generational mix, I thought I would just end with a couple of considerations you might want to think about with regard to upskilling older workers in particular. Remembering, of course, that adopting an age-inclusive lens on how we learn shows that we can all continue learning as we age. There isn't a limit to the brain's ability to continue learning. However, there are some differences, of course. So here are some considerations. First, if you're considering upskilling your workforce as a whole, and that includes your older workers, you might want to accept there's going to be a slower pace of learning. I wouldn't assume it, but accept that it's possible that the older workers will learn at a slower pace, largely due to the amount of crystallized intelligence that they possess and how fitting that new information into the context is going to take a little bit longer. Another thing to consider, very simple thing to consider, is can the course materials be printed? Research shows that older brains can read faster when things are printed out than online or on a screen. Also, providing instructor support and guidance is really big. This isn't always possible if you have to have just some sort of off-the-shelf, out-of-the-box training, but instructor support when it's possible it's helpful to all ages, obviously, but it's especially helpful to older workers. Keep the course material lean, limit distractions within it. Research also shows that older brains, again, because of that wealth of crystallized intelligence, can be distracted by information that may not be relevant because they're trying to fit it into that, that library, as I mentioned. And lastly, ability inclusive learning is going to level the playing field for learners of any age who have vision or hearing loss. Like curb cuts help more than just disabled people, ability inclusive learning is going to help everyone. So those are some considerations in terms of thinking about upskilling your older workers. But again, adopting an age-inclusive learning and development strategy is going to start with an age-inclusive view of our ability to continue learning throughout life. Okay, and now I think it's time for our first poll question, actually. Colin, if you could put that up on the screen, that would be great. So please select all the current upskilling and reskilling activities within your organization. So you can select more than one. Do you do online learning? And do you have internal training programs, tuition reimbursement, cross-team training, mentoring and reverse mentoring? What about gamified learning? Do any of you have that? And I'm going to give folks just a couple of seconds to answer. And also to remind you, of course, that if you have questions, you can pop them into the Q&A box down at the bottom. Okay, Colin, let's see how people have responded, what the results are. So it looks like a lot of you have quite a few things. Looks like online learning, credentialing, micro-credentialing and online learning is the biggest. Like 3/4 of you have that. That's great. So a good mix here. Gamified learning a little bit, but only 10% of you don't have any. So that's also very interesting, good to know. You're in the right place to learn where you can, how you can leverage a bunch of different strategies for getting that done. Okay, so Colin, next slide, please. I'd like to now welcome Sandy Slager, the Chief Operating Officer of MindEdge. She is going to cover how MindEdge is on a mission to change the way we learn. Sandy, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Next slide, Colin. So as Heather mentioned, Chief Operating Officer of MindEdge Learning, and I'd like to offer some perspective on our mission, which is to improve the way the world learns in the context of upskilling and reskilling. Next slide, Colin, please. Great. So before I dive in, I just want to take one moment, 10 seconds of my 7 minutes here to commend all of the participants on this webinar, because I believe that participating in a webinar like this would imply that you have either embraced or have started to embrace what I regard as sort of a fundamental shift in our hiring practices, which is to assign a value to a person's ability to learn, which of course wasn't always the case. You know, hiring once upon a time really, you know, sort of assessing a fit sort of stopped at what somebody already knew when they were coming into an organization or an application process. So so just first, you know, sort of tip of the cap. But digging into MindEdge Learning, a little bit of context. So MindEdge has been around for about 25 years. We specialize in online learning opportunities for adults specifically, which speaks to a lot of what Heather presented around modalities and you know, sort of priorities as it relates to how adults learn and how they succeed in training. We have about 300 courses and certificates offering professional development credits for, you know, CEUs, project management, PDUs, HRCI and SHRM credits, which I'm sure this audience is quite familiar with. Asynchronous learning with a focus on accessibility and expert support. So again, to Heather's earlier slide on you know, sort of instructor guidance or mentorship. The assumption is that learners who are learning asynchronously will have questions, and being able to give those learners a path to an expert who can answer their questions, we have found to be a very important element to success. 96.5% learner satisfaction across our programs, which are strongly rooted in continuous improvement, which is to say the feedback is monitored daily. We make changes as we see fit on the fly. And 2 million learners served across our professional development and for-credit lines of business. And next slide, Colin, please. And that is, you know, sort of done with a pretty small staff. This is a subset of our cheesy happy staff, but we have about 60 people, and our ability to develop scalable learning resources really comes down to a foundation on that scalable technology, that sort of one-to-many learner resources. So so having programs that can be widely distributed across our reseller network and embedded relatively seamlessly within organizations and within companies. And, you know, obviously it helps always to have a happy staff. And so speaking of happy staff, next slide, please, Colin. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the why, if you will, of providing training for staff, which I regard as a two-sided value proposition. So the value to the employee sort of, in many of our minds, goes without saying, right? We are providing, if you are providing training to your staff, you are providing a valued service for their, you know, sort of, that they can, you know, have right now, but also will be with them for an extended period of time. So the important thing to remember is the sort of double-sided scale of that value proposition. So where there is value to the employee, there is also value to the employer. So for instance, the resume building credentials that an employee will get is balanced by an employer's ability to rely on a practical proven skill set within that employee. The competitive benefits that an employee is enjoying is balanced by an organization's ability to recruit with a competitive training benefits program. In fact, 68% of workers say that training and development is the most important workplace policy based on a survey by their company. The on-the-job skills and success that an employee enjoys is balanced by an employer's trust that that employee is using industry best practices, which comes down to, sort of implementation of those micro credentials. Where an employee might be enjoying employer generosity, and an employer has to assign a value to employee loyalty. So, 95% of hiring managers consider employee training a key retention tool, and the data suggests that replacing an employee can cost 50 to 60% of that employee's annual salary. So employee loyalty is not to be underestimated when it comes to workforce stability and employee happiness overall. Where an employee will get a sort of ladder of advancement throughout an organization, the opposite side of the coin for an employer is an increased average tenure. And again, speaking right to the cost the cost of employee turnover is much higher than one might expect. Next slide. And now, so the sort of what of online training. So training of a workforce can fall into a whole bunch of different categories. So you've probably heard quite a bit about stackable credentials, which are sort of chunked up learning resources that over time can take a learner from a particular skill set into a particular micro credential. It all comes down to whether the training sort of aligns to that particular type of learning model. Other types of learning models would include foundational certificates. So a certificate is a sort of bundle of courses that seek to give a learner a piece of paper or a credential or something that indicates that they have passed the 6 or 8 or 10 different courses that comprise that certificate. So let's take a digital marketing certificate. Within that digital marketing certificate, there is a content marketing course, for instance, and maybe 8 other courses. Completing those 8 or 9 courses gives that learner a certificate in digital marketing. And then the next step up from that is to take a certification exam that would give the learner the industry accredited certification in online marketing, certified associate, for instance. So that's sort of the trajectory from an individual course to sort of a more foundational certificate to an industry certification. And now in between those items, you might have technical proficiency training. So oftentimes these can be more boot camp specific, and obviously general awareness training. Oftentimes these are required training for security or for compliance, but the what of training the workforce is at the base of what you are trying to accomplish with this particular person or this particular population, and it's really the foundation of the sort of how and where, which takes us to the next slide, Colin, please. So the where slash how obviously a critical piece of the puzzle when trying to design a program for employees. So spotting the quality of the content is obviously the one of the key, elements that you would want to take into account. You can get at quality just based on how other learners perhaps experienced that particular program. But more than that, you do need to assess the alignment of your particular outcomes, your particular timeline, your budget, certainly the different modalities that your workforce or your particular learner will succeed within. So if that is a boot camp where they are, able to sort of immerse over a shorter period of time, perhaps, or if that is, a longer timeline where they are taking their online marketing certificate program over a course of 6 months. So these are foundational elements of the where and how of designing a training program that will really guide your decisions on where to go. So a longer term commitment, you may be wanting an employee to be headed for an MBA, for instance, and that obviously is an important outcome to keep in mind at the very start of designing that training program, if you will. So the what to train and the where and how to train, and certainly the why, the making the case for the upskilling and the reskilling of the workforce, these are all equally important elements in trying to design appropriate learning resources for your adult learner population, and to achieving the organizational goals that you hope that training will bring back home to your organization. And there we go. So Heather,
Thank you.
That's the end of my presentation.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. And we'll come back, obviously, we're going to have a discussion at the end with all the panelists. I would like to ask our second poll question now. So Colin, if you could pop that up, that'd be great. So this is a pretty simple one for everybody. Would your organization benefit from an AARP brokered online learning vendor collaboration? So if we worked with an online vendor to provide training to your employees, would you be interested in that sort of an offering? And I'll just give folks a couple seconds to answer. Hopefully there's a lot of yeses. So Colin, go ahead and pop up the results so that we can see how people have responded. So half of you, yay, half of you interested in that. That's great. Okay, wonderful. I would like to now turn it over to Dr. Ricardo Villalobos, the Executive Director of the College of Southern Nevada. Dr. Ricardo, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Heather. Appreciate the opportunity. So as noted, my name is Ricardo Villalobos. I'm with the College of Southern Nevada, obviously in Southern Nevada. And excited for this opportunity. You know, we have a theme at the College of Southern Nevada, as is noted in this presentation, about moving forward together. The college, to address kind of the upskilling and reskilling needs of our local area, we knew that we couldn't do it alone, and that there's a part for us to play, but you know, we're just one part in the entire scheme of things. And so we have reached out to multiple people and initiated a CSN strategic workforce plan that I'll share about here shortly. The thing I wanted to mention here that I think is of importance is our Governor Sisolak. He recognized the importance of community colleges and the part they play, particularly by being on the front lines to address the upskilling and reskilling needs of today's workforce, especially considering the recent impact of COVID on our local economy, and I'm sure the impact on your economies as well. he said in the month of April, kind of when we had started to shut things down here in Las Vegas and in Southern Nevada, he said Nevada's community colleges must be the first responders to recruit and graduate students in areas of need. And again, I think he realized that the community college is flexible, it's nimble, it can be responsive to regional needs to address the demands and the needs of today's workforce, particularly again, as it relates to upskilling and reskilling. And generally, community colleges are more affordable. Next slide, please. At the College of Nevada, what we did was developed a strategic workforce plan to address the upskilling and reskilling needs, particularly of displaced workers as a result of the pandemic impact on our local economy, but also for the multi-generational population in general. Our previous governor recognized the need to diversify our economy. In Las Vegas, many know it's the adult entertainment capital of the world, you know, revolving around gaming, hospitality, and tourism. And he launched an initiative to diversify Nevada. And we continue with that effort here locally and across the state. And what this strategic workforce plan reflects is in essence, the idea is to begin with the end in mind, where we researched local regional labor market information to determine in-demand, high need, and emerging industry clusters. For one area of Southern Nevada, we recognized that those areas, or those industries rather, were healthcare, the skills trades, autonomous aerial systems, otherwise known as drones, and then manufacturing, and then warehousing and distribution. And so we know that we needed to begin with that end in mind concept to make sure that we were addressing the needs, particularly in those industry clusters. And so we worked with multiple partners that I'll mention here shortly, and developed a 3 kind of pathway models that's reflected here, with the ultimate objective being reemployment. And so the first one shows that workers needing immediate reemployment. So short-term reskilling, again, they come in for a class or 2 or a particular module, get through it in a matter of in some cases days, some cases weeks, and then they're provided reemployment services and again, launch into immediate reemployment. And then our second pathway, which tends to be, particularly with displaced workers, research reflects it's about 70% of individuals who are displaced want to get back into the workforce, but they want to, you know, change the trajectory of their occupation, but they don't want the traditional 2-year degree. So they launch into a short-term workforce training program where training revolves around, you know, a particular industry, as reflected on the right, as I mentioned earlier. And then they're provided reemployment services, and then again, rapid reemployment. So that kind of training can take anywhere from, you know, for an EKG technician in our non-credit, you know, side of the college, could take 3 days for that. That another maybe more long-term, so to speak, would be our Manufacturing Skills Standards Council Certified Production Technician, which lasts approximately 12 weeks, competency-based, self-paced. So on average, it's about 12 weeks. And then our third pathway was developed for those individuals seeking more long-term training, your traditional college, you know, degree, AA in the community college setting, but we also offer 4-year degrees at the College of Nevada as well. But again, more long-term training, stackable credentials, associate's degrees, you know, certificates of completion, and again, and then being provided reemployment services there as well. And that's particularly for those who are looking for like a life or career change in employment. And again, research reflects about 30% of the individuals who are displaced end up kind of being on this particular pathway. And then what we do on the front end is begin with a holistic assessment where we assess for their occupational goals, the educational, you know, pathway that they'll need to kind of reach that particular goal of employment or occupational aspirations. So we kind of assess for educational goals. We assess for supportive services that they may need, whether they be you know, fiscal needs, childcare needs, housing needs, transportation needs. And so we do an entire holistic assessment where we do that. And then we have a variety of centers scattered throughout the valley that we're going to launch and label them as, or brand them, I should say, as Employ Nevada Career Hubs. And that's a partnership between the local Workforce Development Board, a couple other public assistance agencies. And we're housing those, particularly at the community colleges, student unions, and then also with some community partner sites throughout the valley. So next slide, please, Colin. And this is where, you know, where, as I mentioned earlier, this is not something that the college can do on its own. So we knew that in order to really build something that would really meet the needs of the community, meet the needs of the workforce, meet the needs of you know, employers, we needed to partner. And so this is a few examples of partners that we pursued. We partnered with the Regional Economic Development Authority, and particularly for the labor market information as it relates to regional areas around Southern Nevada. They developed a regional economic strategic plan that notes those in-demand, high-need, emerging clusters, industry clusters. And so we took a look at that and wanted to make sure that we were aligned with what the Regional Development Authority, Economic Development Authority reflected in their strategic plan. And then Chambers of Commerce are huge partners for us at the community college. You know, they allow us to be in touch with their particular workforce needs. And besides that, allow us to build the kind of partnerships with them for employment opportunities for individuals completing the variety of our educational and training programs at the college. And then local government, partnering with them for grants so that we can, you know, target certain segments of the community or certain segments of population. And then they also were partnering with local government where they provide training sites for us to be able to get right into the thick of a particular community where there may be significantly high unemployment rates. So working with local government has been a key factor for us meeting the needs. And then obviously they tend to be more in touch with the specific community needs that may exist within a certain area and what needs to happen to leverage other resources to make sure those needs are met besides the education and workforce training. The local Workforce Development Board, if you're familiar with that, it's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, where we partner with our local workforce board to leverage their WIOA Title I resources. Their funding allows for tuition, for workforce training programs. And so leveraging those dollars, particularly for individuals who are in need, you know, has been a great partnership with our local board. Again, they're tasked with providing employment and training services. I think also that, you know, local boards provide incumbent worker training contracts where the local board does a contract with a particular employer, and then incumbent workers within that particular organization are allowed to be reskilled or upskilled in many cases, in most cases, I should say, so that they're able to, you know, promote from within, develop from within. And so those incumbent worker training contracts are key for employers. You know, particularly as partnering with the local workforce development board. And then they also provide funds for on-the-job trainings where the funds, a certain percentage of the funds could go towards the on-job training for employers looking to fill certain gaps in their organization. And then nonprofit organizations, again, you know, partnering with them for supportive services, also for grants, also for leveraging the resources that exist within, you know, a particular organization that's an NPO. And last but not least, and I would actually say probably most significant is business and industry and key industry employers. Those are the individuals, the organizations that get the community college in touch with the skills needed. And, you know, we've really made an effort to reach out to business and industry, to be aligned with business and industry, that instead of coming to business and industry and saying, here's, you know, our book off the shelf program, we've really tried to reverse that model to listen to business and industry, to inform us with what their needs are so that curriculum can be modified and that we're able to create a greater menu of training and education that meets you know, the needs that are real and relevant for today. And then another key aspect about the BNI is that they can participate in industry advisory councils, again, where they could inform curriculum development, program models, you know, skills needs, you know, knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for particular jobs. And so them being able to participate in industry advisory councils is key in developing the workforce that meets the needs of the area. And then they also, of course, provide subject matter experts. These are individuals who are in the field, who've been in the field, who have an expertise in a particular area and could inform, or in many cases, we're always in need in order to scale certain programs and meet the great demand in certain industries. They provide subject matter experts who can come in and serve as instructors and oftentimes as adjunct instructors, or even in our short-term workforce training programs. And then, of course, providing employment opportunities for individuals completing and or graduating from certain programs. So again, partnerships are critical to meeting the needs to reskill and upskill today's workforce. And last slide, please. And that was my presentation. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. And we will get to your questions for Dr. Villalobos we're going to try and sort of get to those towards the end. I'd now like to quickly hand it over to Dr. Roy Walker, who is the Dean of Health Sciences Program at Malcolm X College. Roy, go ahead, please.
Hi, Heather, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. So my name is Roy Walker. I currently serve as the Dean of Health Sciences at Malcolm X College. For those of you all don't know, Malcolm X College just recently had a redeveloped new building, about a $251 million project in which we incorporated a high fidelity simulation training center that we now deemed as the virtual hospital on the 8th floor. Next slide, please. And this is particularly important because we are the largest provider of allied healthcare education and programming in the city of Chicago. We're located right in the medical corridor of the Illinois Medical District, in which case we provide credentials from a base certificate, advanced certificate, and degree programs, many of which do fit the stackable credential model earlier explained by my colleagues. Next slide. So what I want to talk to you about today is a unique opportunity that we kind of embarked on about 2 years ago as a result of a grant by JP Morgan Chase, in which case it sought to identify ways in which we can bring unskilled, underserved communities into careers in healthcare. And so that required a lot of engagement for our employee partners. Those on the left are just a few of the ones that we did engage with. But when we talk about employer engagement, we operate with them and work with them on multiple levels. Number one is strategy to identify input from them in terms of what the needs are from the college to supply their workforce needs. We create a working relationship with them from the standpoint of not only providing the psychomotor skill learning that is done via our clinical work experience or work-based learning experiences, but then there's also a methodology in which we engage them on an ongoing basis. They participate in many of our interview committees for hiring faculty and staff, many of which participate in our interviewing procedures for students being admitted to the program. They have a hand in developing a curriculum to make sure that it's meeting current trends as far as skill sets are concerned in the industry. And then we also talk about strategically financial assessment for our different programs and where we should invest our dollars for which programs in the future. So we really engage our employers on many, many different levels as we understand that their input is vital to the success of all of our programs. Next slide, please. So I want to get a little more into the crux of the medical assistant program pathway. Obviously working with our hospitals and being very keen to what their needs are, they identified that there was a gap in skills, particularly in medical assistant, that they needed to obtain. Not only do they have a lot of medical assistants that they need to hire, but they also found that they were not retaining a lot of their existing employees. And as iterated earlier by my colleague, the cost for trying to hire a new employee and bring them on board is usually about 56% of their salary, in which case we wanted to find a way in which we could look at homegrown talent within those different institutions. So those hospitals, you can imagine, obviously employ thousands of employees, many of which are entry-level workers. And when they did analysis, they identified that there were several employees amongst their ranks that had been there for 10, maybe 15 years in some instances, and have never really had an opportunity to obtain training, or there was not a pathway within the organization in which case they could have substantial increases in wages to support and sustain their families. So identifying these high demand positions, and medical assistant being one of them, we thought about how we could collectively create a pathway so that some of the entry-level workers within many of these hospitals, again, many of which had been there for over a decade, how we could train these individuals to become clinical positions and hopefully provide for a better opportunity for them as well as the employer, given that they've clearly demonstrated a dedication to their organization given their length of service. So some of the partners that we engaged in this conversation were a Cook County Workforce Board, Chicago Workforce Funders Alliance, Erie House, 1 Million Degrees, World Business Chicago, Civic Consulting Alliance, and Chicago Healthcare Workforce Collaborative. Collectively, we all kind of got our heads together and we thought about how we can create and structure a pathway so that these individuals, if given the opportunity, would ensure success for them to become medical assistants and increasing their skill set as well as their wage earning potential within the organization they have been loyal to for quite some time. Next slide, please. So the structure of the medical assistant program pathway, I should say that we did put out a survey to the employees, and we received an overwhelming response in terms of interest from employers. You know, and one of our partners, out of a list of 500 employees, we got a 300 participant response, overwhelmingly saying yes, that they wanted to participate. And of course, there are some confines in terms of our ability to deliver this program to that many individuals. So we obviously had to go through mechanisms to make sure that we can vet the candidates to ensure their success. One thing to keep in mind is, you know, because we are independently accredited as well as our program is approved, our curriculum is approved through our Illinois Community College Board of Education, we have to adhere to the admission requirements for all of our programs so as to not provide an unfair advantage for those who have sought entry and were unable to get in. So of those 300 individuals that I mentioned before that had expressed interest in this program, understand that they have been out of academia for quite some time, many of which have not probably taken an exam of any sort. Many of them had several deficits in learning. And so we had to kind of figure out how we provide those remedial supports to make sure they met the entry-level requirements to get into the program. So in the very first semester, it was just that. Instead of trying to start them in the curriculum, the pathway right away, you know, we got them enrolled in one college course, medical terminology, which is a pretty entry-level course for standard for most healthcare professions. And then a writer's workshop, in which case this workshop would provide them with the reading comprehension skill sets necessary to be successful in a college placement exam. Many of these individuals had not attained any college credit prior to participating in this program. Many others had college credit, in which case we had to kind of had to go through an ongoing process of making sure that those transcripts were sent to the college so they were evaluated. That student was evaluated in terms of their learning readiness for the program, and we pretty much incorporated a remedial program to kind of get them training up to speed. So this pathway, I should also mention, is a part-time pathway. All the courses are scheduled in the evenings, and all the directors and managers of the 5 different hospitals made sure that the employees' schedules were amenable to the program, which means that we had to have their employer support as well as the institutional support in order to make it successful. So it was pretty intense in the first semester. We did not have a lot of students leaving after the first semester, but as things kind of come along the way, it was a little bit more challenging over time because obviously there's confines with childcare, taking care of home, loved ones in their home environments, and then just the mere nature of just having to work a full-time shift and then try to transition into school. I am happy to say that we did retain about 85% of those participating in the program. We are actually on our 4th cohort, anticipated to start this spring semester. But after 5 successful semesters, the students are prepared and eligible to now apply for medical assistant, provided that they take the licensing exam. I should also mention that while we're in this process, we were also going through accreditation for our medical assistant program pathway. So there was a lot of angst amongst the institution itself that we had so many things that were happening, but the accrediting body was very happy to see that we had a program structured this way, and it's one that we will be reporting on in the future. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to also identify how the partners as well as the college were able to fund this program. Again, we had an overwhelming response, not only from the employees, but also employers. when word got out that Malcolm X, as well as 5 other hospitals and other community-based organizations, were embarking on this opportunity to reskill and upskill incumbent workers. And so they created a fund, the employers' dollars, along with WIOA dollars, as well as the Chicago Workforce Alliance, established a fund, if you will, within the City College of Chicago Foundation, in which this foundation pays for all the wraparound supports for the students. It covers their tuition, it covers their books, covers their uniforms, covers their background immunizations, covers their licensing exams, and covers transportation costs if necessary, as well as child daycare support in the evening time when necessary. So it was a really well-rounded program. It was very interesting that we were able to have a lot of employees at the table, and interesting enough, while many of those employers kind of oftentimes, the employees jump from one hospital to the other, there was an agreement that when students did come through, that if they completed the medical assistant program, they would then return back to their institution and not compete with the other employers that were in the pool. So that was kind of interesting that we had that level of that grain of conversation to make sure that we were all playing fair in the sandbox. But this actually amounted to a robust program that has been pretty much seamless as far as being able to pay for all the students' expenses. For the most part, it allowed the student to be able to focus solely on their education and not any of the outside costs related to it. Next slide, please. So as a result of this, we are looking at embarking on new programs now in other disciplines. There have been discussions about our medical billing, medical coding, HIT program pathway. Pharmacy technician is another program, as well as sterile processing, transitional students and surgical technologists. We are continuing to expound on more opportunities, not only with the main hospital employers that I mentioned earlier, but also some of the smaller physician offices. And now we are also embarking on creating healthcare bridges with our adult education and secondary education partners. There's a lot of opportunities for prior learning assessment, in which case we're able to yield college credit for work-based learning experiences as a means to help expedite students' ability to enter into the pathway and become successful clinicians in their various career choices. And so I believe that concludes my presentation. Any other questions?
Yeah, actually, Roy, we do have some questions for you, and we'll get to those at the end. I'd like to now turn it over to Adriana Lang, who is the Director of Learning and Development at Verizon. This is going to be an interesting switch because we've been hearing about how employers can leverage community colleges to achieve upskilling, and also how they can use online platforms like MindEdge. Other organizations are big enough that they're able to provide this kind of learning in-house. And so I'm really excited to introduce Adriana because she's going to talk to us about what Verizon did, particularly in response to COVID, and how that rapid switch of needing to reskill happened. Adriana, I think you're still on mute. Sorry. Colin, you might need to unmute her, actually, I think. There we go.
How's
Great.
that?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I'm not getting any feedback, but you can hear me. All right, great. So thanks, Heather, for the opportunity. So I'm here today to talk about reskilling and upskilling that happened at Verizon in response to COVID. So as everyone knows, COVID was completely an unplanned event. But what happened was that there was a lot of jobs within our company that had to change on a moment's notice. So our first responsibility is always to our employees. So the first thing we did was to make sure that we could get as many people out of harm's way, which meant home, working from home, as possible. That's where this reskilling retail to customer service came into play. Next slide, please. Okay, so due to COVID, we had to close most of our stores. We have retail stores, and we have thousands and thousands of employees that work in our retail stores. As a response to our retail stores being closed, we had additional volume that was coming into the customer service call centers. So we also had to figure out how we were going to support that volume coming into the customer service call centers. We had these employees, as I said, thousands that would typically work the store that now also had nothing to do. They couldn't go into the store, but yet they wanted to help. There's a line in the Verizon Credo that we run to a crisis. So what we did was to decide that we would upskill and reskill our retail representatives to work in customer service from a work from home perspective. So we had already sent all of our other customer service employees home, which was a whole other upskilling initiative that we were undertaking at the same time. But we also at that moment said we're going to reskill our 7,000 or so retail employees to be able to do this completely different job. And so when we looked at the opportunity, it was good for the employee, it was good for the customer, it was good for the company. And the way that we did that was we looked at what skills and knowledge do the retail employees already have that we could leverage in this new position. So then we set out to design curriculum that would train them to do this completely different job. And I'm sure there were some people that questioned whether the two skill sets would come together. Sales is a bit different than customer service. But what we learned is that it absolutely works together. You know, a sales rep is partially a customer service rep, and a customer service rep is partially a sales rep. So we put the custom curriculum together. It all happened very fast. As you probably all remember, the first days of COVID, days blended into days. So we trained the 7,000 retail employees to take the calls, and that happened around the April timeframe, and they continued to take calls all through the summer until the retail stores started to reopen. And then when the retail stores started to reopen, we started to transition these employees back to the stores. I will tell you though, and by the way, we still have some retail employees helping us in customer service today because some of our retail stores remain closed in certain locations. But as we started transitioning the retail reps back to the stores, we also had a group of retail reps that decided they would stay with us permanently. So the experience they had in the upskilling and the reskilling and the value that they were bringing to themselves and the company was such that they made a permanent decision to stay with customer service. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of our initiative. So as I had initially said, the very first thing we did was to work very hard to get as many customer service reps home, normal customer service reps as possible. And then as we went to train the 7,000 retail reps to be customer service reps, it was completely virtual. So we had to send them equipment and webcams and phones and train them virtually. Verizon had a slight foot up here in terms of virtual delivery because we had been doing a home-based agent program already. So we were pretty skilled at teaching virtually. Next slide, please. A little look at our curriculum. So when we went into it, as I said, we wanted to respect everything that these very tenured employees brought to the job. So our first swipe at the cross training was a one-day training. And I will tell you, typically, when we hire a customer service rep off the street, that training looks like 5 weeks of instructor-led training and then an additional 7 weeks of a nesting period. So to do this retraining, we got it down to the bare minimum in respect for everything that was going on. And the delivery method we chose was one that we heard about a little bit earlier, one that respected different age groups, adult learning theories. So we would kick off the morning with a 45-minute virtual instructor-led session, which would lead into 6 hours of self-paced. We would also wrap up the day with 45 minutes of instructor-led, And there was always a trainer there to support and other support staff. So we never left our learners on their own. Next slide, please. We did that so that we could get as many people on the phones and productive as possible, but we did also listen to the employee feedback. And what we were hearing was that while it was good, they wanted a little bit more. So we went back and we redid the plan to come up with 3.5 days of training and 1.5 days of live call taking. And this ended up being the golden ring for us that got them ready, got them feeling prepared, and got them feeling, you know, like they could really do this job. And you would see on this plan that it was also a blend of virtual sessions with a trainer and support staff, self-guided time, and also practice. We heard earlier just how important practice is, and it's all woven throughout this course map. Next slide, please. So what? The so what for us was that this group of employees were able to be productive during the crisis. They were able to handle about 4 million calls, which is a lot of calls for us. They also told us the experience was very beneficial, whether they decided to stay in customer service or not. They still took all of that knowledge and skill back with them to their other jobs, so they're better able to do even the store job today because they know so much more and they understand what the other employees are doing and how they're doing it. Last thing a customer wants is to be transferred to somebody else. So increasing the knowledge and the skill of either position is certainly a win-win. And I would say, you know, if we had to do it again, we would do it very much the same, using the same skill map, the second skill map that you saw. And the employees tell us that, you know, they would do it again as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up.
Great. Thank you, Adriana. I already have like a million questions that I want to ask you about this. And so I want to, we're going to move now to the sort of Q&A portion. We're going to have I'm going to sort of do a bit of discussion with all the panelists, and then we'll also get to your questions. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A module or in the chat. And I'd like to invite everybody, all 4 panelists, to come back on camera. Great, there you are. Wonderful. So Adriana, because this is fresh in my mind, I'm going to start with you first. You talked about how you had to pivot pretty quickly, and you did this initial pivot where you're like, all right, we're just going to strip it down to the bare minimum. We're going to give them the basic training they need. And then you got some feedback and you changed it a bit. But it sounds like even this second wave was different from the way you usually deliver training. And I'm just curious, after COVID hopefully passes by and there's, you know, ways to deal with it with a vaccine and everything, do you think you'll change? Do you think this experience will then change the way you deliver training across the board at Verizon? Because it sounds like, you know, necessity was the mother of invention, and you were really able to change the way you had been doing things.
Yeah, Heather, I think that's a great question. You know, there's a line that's come up internally: never waste a good crisis. So we did use the crisis as an opportunity to pretty much look at everything we were doing and how we were doing it, and could we do it quicker, different, better. I would say prior to COVID, if a store rep wanted to be a customer service rep, we would have put them through the whole new hire that we put people off the street, the 5 weeks and the 7 weeks. And now that would not be the case. In fact, it's happening to us right now. As store reps want to change jobs, it's a much easier transition. It is that much shorter 5-day period. So even if they don't want to do it forever, even if there was another point in time where we needed help for a short amount of time, we know we have an army of folks we could get ready in 5 days. And that really makes us much more agile than we would have been before.
Right, right. Sandy, my next question is for you. So Verizon is able to provide this training in-house. They're, you know, a big enough organization, but also they're committed to their employees' development. And You know, it used to be back in the 70s and 80s that companies did invest in training. And then there was a sort of a decline in that investment with the advent of new online learning abilities and stuff. And so there was more like a tuition reimbursement approach. What's your hearing? What would you hear from employers when they come to you and say, hey, we want to reskill our workforce, about that sort of like that balance between tuition reimbursement versus funding in a more like like doing it internally?
Yeah, I think if you have the ability, if you have the budget, if you have the staff, if you have the infrastructure, I think to completely tailor your program to your staff, as Adriana's experiences illuminate, I think that is, you know, oftentimes you can find ways to to either, you know, adhere to a lower budget or shrink the time frame, or you have, you know, some opportunities to further customize for the environment. So so I think you know, if you absent that infrastructure, or that you know, those resources, oftentimes we are getting a mix of either you know, we need flexibility, we need lesser expensive options with you know, sort of flexible consumption of content whilst people are doing their actual jobs. And also we have, you know, probably fewer instances of customized, of the need for customized training, as opposed to sort of foundational leadership training, business communications training, you know, sort of baseline technical training that doesn't necessarily need to be specific to like a Verizon's methodology for customer support.
Yeah, and I think MindEdge has an interesting sort of hybrid where the employer can be involved in terms of these are specific skill sets we need for our organization, but we're not necessarily just setting them adrift and saying, here, take whatever you want and we'll just reimburse you. So I see that as a really interesting like opportunity for employers to sort of get back into the training game of providing training in a way that directly answers their skill needs at the time. Do you have any, we did get a question in the chat, did you offer any free online courses or certifications at MindEdge?
We do, and over this particular year, even more so, just in response to, you know, obviously what companies are going through and what general humanity is going through. So we've, I think, given away, you know, $1 million or $2 million worth of content. It's very campaign specific. So in the case of responding to a COVID-19 crisis, we sort of went in the direction of trying to help you know, teachers and educators go from classroom to how do I teach online. So that was sort of a need that we focused on, where we made resources available, you know, sort of carte blanche to in hopes that we could lend a hand where possible. And in other ways, we've given, you know, again, sort of campaign specific creativity and innovation products and creativity in the organization, and specific content that we were hearing from our reseller network that would resonate with their population.
Right. Okay, great, thanks. I'd like to move on to Roy and Ricardo. So we'll start with Ricardo and then hand off to Roy. So my question to you is, one thing that jumped out at me about both of your presentations was the importance of support services, like these wraparound services that enable adult learners to participate in the courses and have that support to still work full time and provide caregiving and all of that. So Ricardo, could you talk a little bit about that and how, I mean, was that something you knew already, or did COVID make an impact on that?
No, thank you for the question, Heather. So I came to the college from a local workforce development board, to be, you know, transparent. And that's where I became familiar with, you know, leveraging the WIOA resources to address the supportive service needs. So as I mentioned, house care or housing, childcare, transportation, and other needs that individuals have that would be viewed as a barrier to education and or employment. So I was familiar with those. And again, I think organizations, employers partnering with their local workforce development board provides an opportunity to leverage those resources for individuals, both who, I mean, the general requirement, obviously it's a federally funded funding stream. So there's definitely like federal eligibility requirements, but it's practically for the unemployed and the underemployed. And so those and incumbent workers as well for reskilling and upskilling. So it could be leveraged there as well. I don't know if Roy wants to add anything.
No, my experience is kind of similar to yours, Dr. Villalobos. I actually manage our Perkins grant, in which case it kind of requires us to engage workforce partners as well as WIOA and identify supports to students that to address barriers for them to be able to achieve academic success. It should be noted that our median age at Malcolm X College is 28. So unbeknownst to most individuals who think that a community college just has a big feeder from secondary education, that's not the case for us. In fact, many of our graduates already have degrees or have had some college already. And so we anticipated, well, let me take that back. We did not anticipate the overwhelming response from all the employers when this opportunity was presented to them, to the employees. However, we did anticipate that there will be some foundational remedial needs for students who had been out of academia for quite some time. So fortunately, we already had the framework established for that. It was just a matter of scheduling it at a time that was amenable to their schedules, given that they were working full time during the day. So we basically had to shift what's also known as our Level Up program into an evening time frame, whereas before that was not available.
Yeah, and I just remember a couple of years ago talking with an organization called General Assembly, and they mentioned this as well. Like, a lot of times there's buzz around how training programs don't work and they fail but usually those are the ones that don't have those wraparound supports and don't have like for example, if you're building a pipeline, if you're an employer and you want to approach a community college and build a pipeline of talent directly in or upskill your existing workers, you can't just be, again, sort of like setting people adrift and saying, go get this skill, right? It seems to me like it has to be very intentional the way you build that pipeline. Just before I move off of this topic for both of you, what either mistakes have you seen employers make, or what things should they know before reaching out to their community college to set up reskilling programs with you guys or with another community college?
I'll go ahead and take that one. So I think that employers need to kind of make sure that they're aware of the academic needs of their students or employees that they need to serve, and make sure those mirror with the institution in which they plan on having the training program they're going to be going through. Our employers did not anticipate having to pay for remedial education, which did not technically put them on the pathway yet. That was one of the benefits of actually having those funds committed to the foundation, was that it allowed them an easy way to procure remediation services for those students. If I had to give some advice, however, I would definitely say it's important that in this onboarding and orientation for anyone embarking on this program, that they understand all the caveats to the entire pathway, particularly when they know in the curriculum when things are going to get really, really challenging. I think it's important for students, employees, know that up front so that you can anticipate what those needs are and make sure those wraparound support services are already in place as they go. No one wants to be taken off guard, and it's always best to be prepared in advance. And so rely on the expertise of those academic institutions, because again, it's our business to know students' needs and what challenges they're going to go through when they go through our pathways, and try to mirror that with employer expectations so that we make sure there's a agreement in terms of how the students are going to obtain success.
Yeah, I'll add two things there. I think one is patience. The college system doesn't necessarily tend to move at the pace of business and industry, and so I think. But however, community colleges in particular, and I believe four-year institutions as well, have a non-credit kind of continuing ed, division of the college, and that's where I'm actually at the College of Southern Nevada. And that division or department tends to be a lot more flexible, a lot more nimble, a lot more capable and able of providing just-in-time training and services. So If for some reason things aren't moving at the pace of business and industry, which with the traditional system it tends not to, I'd suggest reaching out to the non-credit kind of continuing ed arm of the college.
That's a really great tip. I have one final question before I get to the audience questions for Adriana and Sandy. What do you may not encounter this so much anymore because reskilling has become such an imperative now that the skill landscape is shifting so quickly, but what kind of, Sandy, have you heard from employers, and Adriana, what's Verizon's perspective on this, to this objection that, hey, if we invest in training these workers, they're just going to take this training and they're going to leave and they're going to become competitive and go get jobs at the competition, or they're just going to walk out the door. Sandy, I'll start with you, and then I want Adriana to get your perspective from, Verizon's perspective on this.
Yeah, is that a realistic risk? Sure, perhaps, but I think that double-sided value proposition you can't underestimate the value of employee loyalty. One of the things that we have sort of done to balance awarding training with the risk of someone moving on is to hire someone who needs that certification, and we build that into their offer. So we have put a value on your ability to learn what we need you to learn, and we're right up front. We're giving you the courses and the resources and the time on the job to get that project management certification, for instance. They come into the organization knowing that, and they take it very seriously, and they regard it as generosity on the part of their employer. And at the end of the day, that does improve employee retention according to the data. So you can sort of fear the possibility that learner will take that skill set and will lily pad to the next opportunity, but the benefits far outweigh the risk that happening.
Thank you. Adriana, what is Verizon's perspective on this potential objection that could be raised?
Yeah, Heather, this objection does come up from time to time. And so, the question is, what happens if we invest in employees and they leave? And my favorite response to that is, what happens if we don't invest in them and they stay, right? So right. Our customer experience is not going to benefit from an employee who we're not investing in, who we're not training in, who we're not developing. So I think it makes a whole lot of business sense for businesses to train and develop their employees. It increases customer sat, and it increases employee sat. It makes them stay. And we already heard about how much it takes to replace an employee with the reskilling and the upskilling you need to do. So it really is an investment in the company's future.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. I love it. I'm gonna get to a couple of audience questions too. So Dr. Villalobos and Roy, Dr. Walker, what are your views on job readiness coaching programs targeting the 50 plus specifically to prepare them to compete for in-demand jobs?
Yeah, Heather, I think it's great. When I was at the board again, and I keep bringing that up, but I want such a great opportunity for our audience to take advantage of. We had an AARP 50 plus program there that I believe was specifically a job coaching program, and had tremendous success with the professional growth and development of those individuals with employment placement rates. So it was a huge success. I believe we were funded a few cycles. And then I think, I'm not sure actually if it still is continuing. I haven't been at the board for a few years now, but I totally believe in them. I think it's great. I think it caters specifically to that population. So absolutely. I mean, seen it, I've done it, and it's great. So.
I would have to agree. Obviously in healthcare, there's a sensitive need for having seasoned individuals who've experienced life to be able to provide a much more empathetic quality of care to patients. And of course, with the Affordable Care Act, and knowing those patient satisfaction surveys are directly tied to their compensation, it's best to have like-minded individuals with like-minded experiences who we typically see in a setting in which they're needing of hospitalization or medical care. And so it's a win-win for us. Healthcare is one of those areas in which those seasoned individuals will be very much welcome and appreciated, not only by the patients, but certainly the employer.
Right. Adriana, I didn't know if you were trying to jump in there, but if yes, please jump in. If not, I would love to hear your thoughts too on how older workers can contribute to, helping older, say, purchasers of equipment or purchasers of services. I don't know if that's come up. I know that in insurance industry, we often hear that, like, if you don't own a house, you're not necessarily going to see why should you get homeowners insurance. So we've heard that from other call centers. I wonder if you have those same, having that blend of many ages in your call centers helps.
Yeah, I wasn't going to jump in before, but I do believe having a blend of ages in the call center, which we do have, helps, because you have diversity of thought, diversity of experience, which is, again, the same as our customer base. While we do have, millennials and younger with phones that we need to help, we also have folks like my parents we need to help, right? So understanding the experiences of all of those folks, not just the digital natives, is helpful. And having conversations within Verizon, within your training classes, at the water cooler, with these different age groups helps share those experiences.
Yeah, great. I have a question, Sandy, for you from the audience, although anyone can answer this as well. Have you seen an uptick on training requests for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or embedding those types of principles into your courses?
Yes, that is the short answer. Yeah, we're in the process of developing some courseware that is relatively foundational. When we started to get into the curriculum design, it became very clear very quickly that that is, one piece of training that can be sort of curated for a number of different, reasons and objectives and audiences and the like. So the short answer is yes, and we're starting, and I anticipate a year of sort of curriculum refinement and development before we have a fully fleshed out program that serves all of the needs that have been expressed to us.
And do you guys have, do you focus more on sort of technology, like you mentioned digital marketing, but also do you do sort of like full stack web development courses? What's the breadth of your learning platform?
We have mostly sort of more soft skills. So there's business communications and leadership and management skills and emotional intelligence and things like that. The more, as you get sort of down the more technical spectrum, you do get to more, Lean Six Sigma and digital marketing types of courseware. The types of more, software development or other, sort of web design. We have a certificate in web design that has a lab built into it that allows for that, sort of practice and feedback. It's I would say introductory, so our training, although it goes into more advanced concepts on certain topics, we have a lot of introductory and foundational concepts across, I think 30 or so different categories that fall just this side of sort of, intensive boot camp tech training.
Right. Yeah. I know there's a couple more questions, and what we'll do is we'll respond to those via email. We're running out of time, and I just have so many more questions I want to ask everyone, but I know we have a hard stop. So I just want to say again, thank you to the panelists. It's been such a great conversation. So many great ideas for employers to leverage either platforms like MindEdge relationships with community colleges, providing internally and pivoting when needed. So I just want to thank you all for participating and for letting us know like how you approach it. A couple of sort of final thoughts. In terms of becoming or developing an age-inclusive perspective on learning, remember that our brains, thankfully, right, our brains don't atrophy with age. If we keep active, the brain's ability to, its plasticity, its ability to absorb information doesn't stop. Newer learners, the very newest entrants to your workforce, the Gen Z folks, they may need a little more direction as they start to transition away from a externally directed learning environment, like where the the motivation's coming from the outside. They're going to start to transition more towards being intrinsically motivated, but in the beginning, they may need a little more help. Like, hey, you should think about developing these skills, or like, let me direct you a bit more. So at the lower end of the age spectrum, that could be something to consider. And then just remembering that older workers, while they often do take a longer time to absorb course material, it tends to be very much rock solid once it gets in there, because it's in that library. So those are just some final thoughts. Again, thank you all for coming. The PowerPoint will be available in about 48 hours. And then of course there'll be, this webinar will be also on demand. So thank you all so much. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks everyone. Bye.